For much of the 20th century, our idea of cinema music was classical, symphonic, stately even. But might this also be film music? A pop hit by the Rolling Stones, turned up to full volume, driving the action.
The music I knew and the music that scored my life is the music I heard growing up and the music that was around me at the time. And that was the music that propelled all the action in the story.
Mean Streets was the most extreme expression yet of how popular music had pushed aside the symphonic tradition to take hold of the film score. As new musical genres like rock, pop and disco were born, they reverberated throughout cinema.
Popular music revitalised the soundtrack, and indeed the movies themselves. More distinctive, simpler, more direct, more memorable. It was music that appealed to a younger audience and to a new generation of composers and directors who knew how to use it.
These composers pushed the film score in fresh, exciting directions. Composers like John Barry,
Those screaming horns are giving us a tremendous sense of power and sex.
and Lalo Schifrin, whose cool jazz beats gave an inner voice to iconic movie stars.
Steve McQueen, he said, Bullet is a very simple guy. I want you to write a simple thing.
It was pop arranger Ennio Morricone who orchestrated this, one of the greatest gunfights in cinema. Here the characters are choreographed to the music in an almost operatic way. But pop has also been used for commercial rather than creative reasons, to help fund and promote big-budget movies. And when the most influential director of his generation decides he can get rid of original scores altogether, has the use of popular music in film gone too far?
Is it really possible to cut out the composer and still make a musically great film?
In the late 1940s, cities across America were buzzing with a new style of jazz. More exciting, less predictable, more like the sound of real life. But it was far removed from the discipline of a traditional film score, and Hollywood cinema wasn't ready for it. Until a film came along in 1951, which would be the perfect vehicle.
A Streetcar Named Desire boasted the first all-jazz score, and it's one of those movies I can remember seeing for the first time. I was completely blown away by the jazz, the immediacy of it, the physicality too. And if it had that effect on me in the 1980s, think what it did to audiences in 1951.
A Streetcar Named Desire stars Marlon Brando as Stanley. The arrival of his unstable sister-in-law, Blanche, played by Vivien Leigh, causes sexual tension, which leads to her breakdown. You can hear the seeds of this in the music from their very first encounter. The soundtrack was the debut film score of Alex North, a modernist composer who loved jazz and had long wondered if its essence could be captured in a more classical musical structure. With Streetcar, North harnessed the rhythms and harmonies of jazz to emphasize the complex chemistry between the characters.
As soon as Stanley walks in the room, you get this brilliant jazz riff. He's got a march to it, a sort of step. It's like the March of Fate. He will be her nemesis. Over that, we get these gorgeous two sax solos. One of them is starts almost straight away, which is kind of Stanley.
You must be Stanley. I'm Blanche.
Oh, your step sister.
Yes.
Oh, hi.
There's a real sense that Stanley's there in all his sweaty glory. We suddenly hear another sax solo, which immediately begins to climb higher and higher and higher, until it almost gets within a range that beyond which it can't go. That is Blanche.
Hey, you mind if I make myself comfortable? My shirt is sticking.
Please, please do.
Be comfortable. That's my...
That sax solo is telling us what she's feeling, and she's already close to breakdown. These are all moments in the scene that simply couldn't be put across any other way. And what the instruments are doing is being played in a way whereby you can hear the breath, you can hear the notes moving around, you can hear them being bent and changed. And it begins to sound like a human voice. When you add that sound to a scene, is a real sense of physicality, humanity, if you like, something which you couldn't get out of classical music, but which jazz gives you from the first second you hear a note.
But this is no ordinary love triangle. Despite Blanche's attraction to Stanley, it's Stella, his wife, with her unavoidable sexual power, who really has a hold over him.
Hey, Stella! Hey, Stella!
North's score in this scene is doing what all great film music does, telling us more than we can see, and in this case, more than the characters will actually tell us. This scene's about desire. You can hear in every note of that sax how Stanley feels about Stella and how she feels about him and what binds the two of them together. And that was the problem. The Legion of Decency, a self-appointed moral pressure group, were very powerful at this time, and they saw the scene, heard the music, and took exception to both. The scene had to be cut, and North had to go back and rescore. Out went the sax, to be replaced by strings. Sentimentality took over from sensuality. And in the version everybody saw, Stella wanted Stanley back. But in North's original, Stella just wanted Stanley.
You don't ever leave me, baby.
Through the 1950s, jazz expanded the range of film music in America and drove a wave of gritty dramas whose soundtracks captured the moral complexities of the characters and stories. Across the Atlantic, Britain was producing its own socially aware dramas with contemporary scores to match. Beat Girl was set in the Soho beat scene, and while its moralistic plot was all a bit trad, its music harnessed the urgency and energy of jazz-influenced British pop. Beat Girl was the debut film score by John Barry, a young composer and arranger who'd had several pop hits with his own group, the John Barry Seven. The band's signature sound was driven by catchy guitar riffs and Barry's own trumpet solos. Barry's real ambition was to have a career as a pop star, and he only landed the Beat Girl job because he shared the same manager as the film's star, Adam Faith. But maybe it was predestined. Barry's father had run a cinema chain, and as a child he'd lapped up movies.
John Barry worked here in Soho, the heart of London's film and music industries, Tin Pan Alley. He even used a strip club as a rehearsal space for his band, the John Barry Seven. I think you can hear those influences in the job that he did, arranging and performing the theme to the first James Bond film, Dr. No.
Dr. No's opening titles are animated entirely around the rhythm of the music, pushing it to the fore. You can't ignore the swagger of the guitar and the almost sleazy quality of the horns. Barry was brought in to arrange this theme from a tune written by big band singer Monty Norman.
I never saw the movie, I never met Saltzman and Broccoli, I never met the director. I never even read a script. I just knew of Bond. I think it was in the Daily Mail. There was a strip of Bond, which I'd occasionally looked at. So I knew what it was about.
Monty Norman's theme for Dr. No was based on a number that he'd written for a musical, and it went like this. So what John Barry did in his arrangement was bring to it everything he understood about pop and jazz. First of all, he kept that melody line, but he gave it to the twangy guitar that he understood so well from the John Barry 7 days. Then he added a real driver behind it, which is this deep bass brass sound. Then he arranged this fabulous middle eight, which takes the music and the film onto a different level.
That screaming horn section has an extraordinary confidence and raciness.
But it's also deeply pop, it's deeply jazz. It's got a wonderful kind of mishmash of all the things that John Barry understood. John Barry got paid 250 quid for his arrangement of the Bond theme, and it wasn't until he queued up with everybody else to see Dr. No at the cinema that he realised how ubiquitous the theme was. He contacted the producers, said, "I arranged you an opening title music. I didn't expect to hear it sploshed through the whole film. Can I have some more money?" And they said, "No, but you can score the next one, if there is a next one."
In fact, Barry went on to score 11 Bond movies, and you can hear the difference when he's not just an arranger, but a fully fledged composer in his own right. For Goldfinger, Barry drew from his pop contacts, casting Shirley Bassey to sing the title song.
It's the kiss of death from Mr. Goldfinger.
From now on, every Bond movie's title number would be performed by a leading pop star of the day, and the song would help sell the movie.
It's cold. He loves only.
Having firmly established his Goldfinger theme in the opening song, Barry runs it through a series of symphonic variations throughout the film, as when Bond pursues Goldfinger through the Swiss Alps. And here, Barry seamlessly switches from the original Bond theme to the Goldfinger tune. Although his music's origins are rooted in pop and jazz, Barry was also scoring the characters with their own themes, in a way traditional Hollywood composers would have understood. Barry's success showed how the worlds of film and pop music were drawing ever closer together. But throughout the 60s, although pop was becoming an ally of film, it also threatened to pull young audiences away from the movies, overtaking them in popularity. So, with a strident guitar chord and an opening shot that captures the tidal wave of fan hysteria, one film set out directly to embrace the pop phenomenon.
A Hard Day's Night, the first film to feature the Beatles, the world's biggest pop band. Nobody had ever seen anything like it before, but then that was the idea. A young generation could tell straight away this was a movie aimed directly at them.
Director Richard Lester faced a unique challenge. He had to choose songs which had already been recorded by the Beatles before a script had even been written, and somehow construct a film that made sense.
We were given 10 songs, and I rejected 2. You sit down, given this bag of toys of wonderful songs, and you think, I can't see where this can go.
The only thing that bound these songs together was the band. So Lester looked to the Beatles themselves for ideas about how to build his sequences.
They all had a fairly developed sense of the surreal. First thing I tried to do with the film is to let the audience know that things were not going to be a straightforward documentary narrative of this is a day in the life of the Beatles.
Aye, the Liverpool Shuffle.
In this scene, the band magically switch from playing cards to playing a song.
It was saying to the audience, you see, life is not as you think it is. There is a surreal quality to them. The whole of Hard Day's Night was starting out of them being ordered about in small spaces.
No messing about. Lennon, put them girls down. I'll tell your mother of you.
Being yelled at and being chased by people. And that sudden sense of relief.
We're out!
Can't buy me love.
When they break out and run down a staircase and out into a field.
The success of A Hard Day's Night showed how pop music could get younger audiences flocking to the cinema. Hollywood had also seen how the wind was blowing, and leading the way was Walt Disney. Looking to appeal to children and parents alike, Disney realised his new composers had to be au fait with the pop song. He signed up the songwriting duo brothers Richard and Robert Sherman, creators of the smash hit You're 16.
So my dad challenged us to write pop music, and we started writing pop songs. And we had some big #1 hits with the rock and roll song. Uncle Walt wanted the brothers to bring their songwriting magic to a new Disney movie. He said, you know what a nanny is? We said, oh yeah, it's a goat. You want to do an animated film about a nanny goat? No. He says, no, it's an English nursemaid. Oh yeah, sure we can. So we read this enchanting series of stories.
The challenge facing the brothers was not only to compose the songs for Mary Poppins, but to construct a story from these books. We were reading them with great alarm because we were saying, well, what's the plot? I mean, where is the storyline? It was not a storyline at all. It was just wonderful adventures with this magical nanny who comes in and does great stuff, and then she leaves. So we knew we had to do some quick thinking. We said, let's come in with a storyline. The brothers fused American pop with a more surprising tradition, English music hall. Their passion for these songs would be the inspiration behind the film's score, with the movie set in Edwardian London. I've always been a fan of English music hall. Those wonderful old songs, boiled beef and carrots, all those things like that. Walt bought that. Right away, he knew what I was talking about. Yeah. We were called in, and there were Walt Disney, all of them, singing Knees Up, Mother Brown, kicking their feet up in the air. And they're all out of breath, and Walt said, now, I want you to write me a song like this, right? We said, yes, Walt, we'll write you a song like that. So we started with step in time, step in time, step in time, step in time. You never need a reason, never need a rhyme. Step in time, you step in time. Take your elbows. Take your elbows, take your part, take your elbows, take your part, take your elbows, take your elbows, take your elbows. That little piece went for 12 minutes. You know, one of the greatest scenes you've ever seen. And the Shermans would mix all the ingredients that make a classic pop song. A memorable lyric, a catchy melody, and a potent hook to create the film's most loved tune. We came up with this nonsense word,
which we decided would be a great gift for Mary Poppins to give to the children. So we said, let's give them a really funny, crazy, obnoxious word. And we said, it's got to be super colossal. And super colossal, well, anybody would write super colossal. So we said, super something, super crazy, super supercalifragilistic, aha. And then we had because I was afraid to speak when I was just a lad. Me father gave me nose a tweak, told me I was bad.
But then one day I learned a word, a sight we ain't a nose.
The biggest word you ever heard, and this is how it goes. Oh, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Even though the sound of it is something quite atrocious. If you say it loud enough, you'll always sound precocious. Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Underline.
These songs earned the Sherman Brothers 2 Academy Awards.
I've reached the top and had to stop, and that's what's bothering
And their
me.
knack for writing pop tunes would underlie the huge success they went on to enjoy with other classic Disney movies, like The Jungle Book.
I'm tired of walking around. Oh, ooby-doo. I want to be like you. I want to walk like you. Talk like you.
The Shermans had applied their pop sensibility to reinvigorate the animated musical. But in Europe, an entirely different film genre would unexpectedly be changed by a pop composer. This is the opening of A Fistful of Dollars. Its bold graphics and striking music a declaration that the spaghetti western had arrived. Italian filmmakers were giving new life to one of the oldest genres of cinema. Written by Ennio Morricone, this title theme boasts the kind of elements that made his sound so distinctive: the melody, the whistles, the recording of a whip crack. This use of real-world sounds came from Morricone's time as an arranger of Italian pop records.
Molti potranno pensare che è arbitrario mettere dei suoni veri, i suoni di macchina da scrivere appunto, di poltrone, di barattoli, nella musica leggera. Io l'ho fatto per dare un contributo di verità a queste composizioni a me affidate.
The music for A Fistful of Dollars was based on a pop record that Morricone had arranged, called Pastures of Plenty, which had impressed director Sergio Leone.
We come with the dust and we're gone with the wind.
Leone and Morricone had been friends since childhood, but Leone also knew that the innovation Morricone had shown on his pop records could deliver something special, despite a tight budget.
Morricone brings his own sensibility to the Western. He mixes his kind of idea of 60s music and modern sounds and very individualistic sounds with the idea of the Old West, the Spanish guitar, the whistle, this sense of folk music.
And here he combines these with the 19th century European device of the leitmotif.
So out of that title music, when we first see Clint Eastwood, the man with no name, he gets his own little motif. Just a little flute suggestion. But then when he is spotted by the villain, you get this. And it's got a little bit more of a sense of danger about it. And above that comes a Japanese flute, which to me says Yojimbo, which is the Japanese epic on which this film is entirely based. So now Eastwood is a samurai. And this is what Morricone does. He drops these tiny musical ideas into the film throughout, giving us a different feel, a different sound each time, sometimes very, very short, just a couple of notes. Here we have the other great gift that Morricone has, a gift for melody, and not just melody, a melody that will break your heart.
Get 3 coffins ready. Huh?
But often a melody that is placed either before or during the most violent moment of these films. It gives them an extraordinary texture. Listen to this. It's actually still quite a thin sound. It's a single melodic instrument over a string section, so it's not full orchestra. This is partially because of budget, but also because I think Morricone understands that we want to hear small textures working under these moments. But it really makes us root for Clint Eastwood and gives Clint Eastwood's character a soft side, which is simply not there in the way that he plays it. By the time we get to the final shootout, that theme of Eastwood's has become huge. We now have a trumpet on the lead line. Very Spanish, beautiful. We have strings behind, we have the voices behind. So it has an amazing strength. And we are now in a world of ritual. It's as if the music is making the characters choreographed.
They appear to move in time with the music.
And it gives it a timeless quality, but it also gives it an operatic quality. This shootout was inevitable from the first moment of the film, and now the music is giving us the arena within which it can happen.
Scenes like this place Morricone in the great tradition of composers who shape not just the sound of a movie, but its very construction. In this and his subsequent films with director Sergio Leone, Morricone was a fully fledged artistic collaborator in creating the cinematic drama. The spaghetti western established a trend for increasingly violent films with almost wordless heroes, whose inner nature was expressed through the music. This method of scoring characters would make its way into American cinema through a film shot here on the West Coast.
I'm driving through San Francisco. It's a beautiful sunny day. And thanks to the movies, these are some of the most recognizable streets in the world. But there's something missing. That's more like it.
This is the soundtrack to the movie Bullitt, set in San Francisco and starring Steve McQueen. Bullitt was scored by Lalo Schifrin, an Argentinian-born composer who trained in both classical and jazz music. He'd worked in Hollywood since the early 60s and was best known for his theme to the TV series Mission Impossible. Schifrin had also been mentored by the jazz legend Dizzy Gillespie, playing with him in New York in the 50s, and he wanted to inject some of those jazz rhythms and beats into the soundtrack for Bullitt. Like Clint Eastwood's gunslinger, Steve McQueen's detective, Frank Bullitt, rarely speaks, but Schifrin's score is his voice.
Steve McQueen, he said, Bullitt is a very simple guy. I want you to write a simple theme.
McQueen's charisma is that of an ordinary man required to do extraordinary things. His almost wordless performance means that we're relying a lot on how he looks for that charisma. However, Lalo Schifrin's music gives his every moment, no matter how mundane, a cool energy. Bullitt's most famous sequence is 10 minutes long and contains no dialogue, but an awful lot of driving. What makes it compelling is Lalo Schifrin's score, which, through a couple of very precise gear changes, turns a street game of cat and mouse into something altogether more deadly.
Here, Schifrin's music focuses on Bullitt's intense concentration as he tails a pair of mobsters through the busy streets. It is insistent, but tightly controlled, as we feel the pressure building up for the inevitable chase. So, what will the score do next?
The director asked me to write music for The Chase. I said, no, why not? Because you are going to orchestrate The Chase with sound effects. You don't need music. When Bullet is in the car and change gears, that's when The Chase starts. And I build music up to that point, and at that moment, stop.
And yet people congratulate you on your scoring of The Chase, I believe.
Yes, they said, I love this, the music all over The Chase, and there's no music.
3 years after Bullet, Schifrin was invited to score another, altogether more violent thriller set in San Francisco. And with Dirty Harry, director Don Siegel offered Schifrin considerable scope to experiment.
And he said, I have a new film, and I said, I want you to write the music for it. And he gave me complete freedom. He didn't tell me what to do.
While the dramatic centre of Dirty Harry is Clint Eastwood, much of Schifrin's music actually accompanies Scorpio, the crazed serial killer he pursues.
I love, particularly, right from the very start in Dirty Harry, the first thing we have is Scorpio up on the roof with his gun trained. And the music has a terrific power to it.
Scorpio. He came with the idea of voices, very frenetic, kind of hysterical voices.
Schifrin uses unusual sounds, such as rubbing the rim of a glass, to take us inside Scorpio's psychotic mind. There's also a sense that Scorpio represents the end of the 60s dream, a countercultural figure turned psychopath. Schifrin captures that idea in this scene with acid rock guitar riffs.
In Bullet, I have electric guitar playing jazz, or jazz style. In Dirty Harry, I used for Scorpio, electric guitars playing kind of acid rock because I wanted it to make a difference.
Again, it's unpredictable.
Yeah, I'm menacing, a little bit menacing.
Schifrin had taken the popular music-influenced score to a new level of sophistication. But he was still working in the classic mould of a film composer, trusted by the director to take charge of how a film sounded. But by the 1970s, a new generation of directors was coming into cinema who'd grown up with pop music as the soundtrack to their lives and wanted to reflect this far more directly in their films. In 1973, the greatest of these directors began a journey back into his own youth, here on the streets of New York's Little Italy. Martin Scorsese's Mean Streets was a film about the New York Mafia. It followed in the wake of The Godfather, but concerned small-time criminals and drew extensively on Scorsese's own memories. Scorsese made it on a small budget, raised independently of the big studios. But it meant he had creative control, and he made the key decision to leave out the composer entirely, drawing the film's soundtrack from his own record collection.
It wasn't even a question of it. I can never have a composer like Bernard Herrmann or Elmer Bernstein, or that's out of the question. You know, I knew I was going to make films somehow, but when I did, the soundtrack's up to me. And the music I knew, and the music that scored my life, and still does to a certain extent, is the music I heard growing up. So music was very, very much a part of expression of who you are and how you feel. reality, Mean Streets really takes place between 61 and 63, even though we shot it in 72. There was Phil Spector, and there was the Wall of Sound. And that's the sound I hear in my head. And that was the music that propelled all the action in the story. And because that's what was playing in the middle of the night in those after-hour joints that we were in. Because there were jukeboxes in these places, you see. And especially in the summertime, that music would just echo through. And when you're living in a tenement area, everybody's out. And everybody knows what everybody else is doing.
Right from the pre-title sequence, Scorsese used a record he loved to accompany the lead character, Charlie, played by Harvey Keitel.
I imagined the opening of the picture, looks at himself in the mirror, wonder who the hell he is. But then he puts his head back on the pillow, and as we do that, we cut 3 times into the beat. So that was all worked out in my head, way, way in advance. The first beats of Be My Baby, they just emerged, and they're with me all the time. Even when I'm on set, it's always... And they know. Everybody looks at me. Yeah, okay. And it's just what I do. It's become part of my DNA. And then the thing was to go to home movies. And then intercut with actual 8mm films that my brother took of his first son's christening. That was 1965.
Mean Streets tells how Charlie's attempts to get ahead in the local mafia are complicated by Catholic guilt and his loyalty to his irresponsible friend Johnny Boy, played by Robert De Niro. Scorsese carefully makes us wait before showing us the two friends together.
All right, okay. Thanks a lot, Lord. Thanks a lot for opening my eyes.
Charlie is waiting at the bar for Johnny Boy. What could Scorsese possibly do with such an ordinary scene? Well, what he does is to pull off possibly the greatest musical coup of the whole movie. The music leaps into the foreground, and suddenly Johnny Boy is Jumping Jack Flash, and he's a gas, gas, gas. And we know Charlie can't trust him. Look at Charlie's face. He knows Johnny Boy's gonna be trouble.
It's a world in which there is conformity and a tradition, albeit a tradition which is underworld. Johnny is anarchy, hence Jumping Jack Flash. I knew it had to be in slow motion, but what we found when I cut to Harvey and he put that glass of liquor down, it just worked beautifully with the music. He moves back to the edge of the bar, and there's a woman sitting there. I don't know who she is, but she looks like a ghost. I guess basically, that was the movie. That was the one. I put it all in there. And if anyone was ever to wonder what that life was like or what that world sounded like and felt like, they could check out that picture.
Scorsese had proved that a serious, dramatic film could cut out the composer altogether. That same year, another of this new wave of young directors, George Lucas, explored his boyhood experiences in American Graffiti to a soundtrack consisting entirely of 50s and early 60s pop classics. But through the 70s, pop music itself was changing, evolving new styles and genres. For film producers canny enough to ride this wave, there was serious money to be made.
In 1977, a film was released that was shot here in Brooklyn and used the latest pop music to tell us about the dreams and hopes of its characters. Not a back catalogue of 50s and 60s hits, but a phenomenon that was sweeping the country and would burn very brightly, if a little briefly. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Disco.
The producers of Saturday Night Fever wanted to build its soundtrack around 6 songs that had already been recorded by the Bee Gees. To provide additional tracks and incidental music, David Shire was called in. With a theatre and jazz background, Shire had written scores for key 70s films like All the President's Men. He now had to find a way of working within the disco style.
I guess that's what I liked about disco. You could take anything. You could take Beethoven, you could take Rimsky-Korsakov, you could take Mussorgsky, and just put 120 beats per minute to it in a rhythm section, and it would kind of work, you know.
For this sequence, Shire adapted a classical piece, Night on a Bare Mountain, by the 19th century Russian composer Modest Mussorgsky. Shire gives it a disco twist, which enhances the tunes and the scene's dizzying, dangerous feel.
And it turned out to be, of course, the most lucrative film job I've ever had. The least composing, but the most rewarding financially.
The Saturday Night Fever soundtrack sold 15 million copies and spent 6 months at number 1. The film itself earned more than $90 million at the US box office, a huge sum for the time. Hollywood studios would now seek to exploit this cash cow with an eye firmly on the commercial rather than the artistic possibilities of pop songs. In the 1980s, with American cinema ticket sales topping $1 billion a year, Hollywood and the pop industry became increasingly codependent. Big budget movies like Top Gun were indiscriminately filled with pop and rock tracks. Videos were used to market movies on MTV, while the films were used to promote the artists themselves. Against this corporate background, it would take a director of singular vision to make popular music mean more than the sum of its lyrics. Right from the exaggeratedly idyllic opening of Blue Velvet, David Lynch uses 50s pop songs to create a dreamlike atmosphere.
Bluer than velvet was the night.
For Lynch, classic pop is like necromancy, bringing to life a world of strange, chilling encounters between people on the edge, as in this scene where the title song is performed by the film's star, Isabella Rossellini. Here, Lynch's sinister alchemy twists a seemingly innocent love song to highlight the growing obsession of the film's protagonist, Jeffrey, with Rossellini's character.
Was the night from the stars.
To help Rossellini with her vocal performance, the producers called in a songwriter and composer, Angelo Badalamenti.
And I meet with Isabella. We work on the song Blue Velvet. We then record it. David puts the earphones on. He listens to this whole thing, takes the earphones off, and he says, "This is peachy keen. That's the ticket."
But that wasn't the end of it. Lynch wanted to use a track by the band This Mortal Coil in the film, but the producers couldn't afford to license it. Instead, they suggested Badalamenti should write an original song.
So I said, "Okay, but I need a lyric. I'm not a lyric writer." I said, why don't you tell your director to write a lyric?" And I'm recording Isabella now on Blue Velvet, and she comes in with this little piece of paper, and on it, on the top says Mysteries of Love. And I'm reading it. You know, sometimes a wind blows and you and I float in the darkness and kiss forever, blah, blah, blah. I'm saying, this is awful. So what do? I called David and I said, "David, I'm just curious, what kind of music do you hear for it?" "Oh, Angelo, just let it float. Make it like the tides of the ocean. Make it kind of cosmic," and no clue, right? Yeah. I take the lyric, I put it on the piano. I'll play it for you if you like.
Sure, please.
Sometimes a wind blows, and you and I
In this scene, the song Mysteries of Love epitomizes the purity of love, not the morbid desire Jeffrey felt for Rossellini's character when Blue Velvet played.
The lyric forced me to, even David's description, just something floating and no real time, no rhymes, no hooks.
Lynch had started out wanting to include one pop track in his film and had ended up co-writing a brand new one. But more importantly, he'd found himself a musical soulmate. Angelo Badalamenti has gone on to score pretty much all of Lynch's films since, and I think there's a reason for that. His music is the sound of Lynch's world, with all its paradoxes. It's cold, but at the same time it's very warm. It's nostalgic, and yet it's very, very modern. And to be frank, for me, David Lynch's films couldn't work without Badalamenti's music.
One day in 1989, the pair sat down at Badalamenti's piano and in a single take wrote the theme for a groundbreaking new television series.
David comes in, Angelo, now we're really pals, you know. And he says, we're in a dark wood. And I'm going like, no, Angelo, those are beautiful notes, but can you do them slower? Oh, okay. No, Angelo, slower. I says, David, if we do any slower, I'm gonna play in reverse. Okay, Angelo, now there's a girl named Laura Palmer. She's a very troubled teenager. And she's in the dark woods, and she's coming out behind some trees. She's very beautiful, too. Give me something that's her. That's it, Angelo. Now let it build, because she's coming closer, and she's so troubled. She's got tears in her eyes. Angelo, it's so sad. Reach a climax. That's it, just keep it going. Beautiful, beautiful. Now start coming down, but fall slowly. Come slowly, slowly. Down, down. That's it. That's it. Quiet. Now, Angelo, go back into the dark woods and stay there. There's an owl in the background. He said, Angelo, you just wrote Twin Peaks.
From a starting point in pop, Badalamenti and Lynch formed a fertile partnership of director and composer almost unparalleled in contemporary cinema. But could a truly creative director ever insist, in effect, that he wouldn't touch a composer with a barge pole? As a composer, I rather took against Quentin Tarantino, gifted filmmaker though he is, when he reportedly said that he doesn't use composers because he wouldn't trust one with his movies. But then maybe it's my prejudices I should be challenging. Maybe he's right. The violence of Reservoir Dogs divided audiences and critics, but its soundtrack was hailed as one of the finest uses of pop music in a generation. So how does Tarantino get round the tricky issue of being allowed to use someone's music in this way? Enter music supervisor Karen Rachman.
What does a music supervisor do on a movie?
Your job can be as basic as licensing every track and just handling the negotiations and making sure that you take care of all the rights.
What happens if you have to then go and say, we may not be able to clear the rights on?
It happens all the time. 85% of the movies I've worked on, you do not get every song you want.
Yeah.
During Reservoir Dogs, Quentin, when he wrote that script, he had written in the songs. Especially with the scene Stuck in the Middle with You, that was being shot too. So he had a music supervisor on the film who told him, you can't use any 70s songs. Quentin was devastated. And I said, I will get you Stuck in the Middle with You. And I had to get on the phone with Joe Egan because I needed him to call the publisher. He didn't want to do it, and I had to reference things like Singing in the Rain used in Clockwork Orange and how we're paying homage to his song, even though somebody's getting their ear cut off by a sick freak, you know?
Did you tell? You had to tell him the scene, I
You
assume,
have to
didn't
tell him the scene, yeah, of course. After I got him Stuck in the Middle with You, Quentin said, what can I do for you? Thank you so much, I appreciate it. And I said, you can fire your other music supervisor.
Karen Rachtman worked with Tarantino on his follow-up to Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, which again featured characters interacting with songs.
He didn't think he was going to put a song when Bruce Willis was driving in the car. And he said, get me a song. Hey.
Flowers on the wall.
Flowers on the Wall ended up there. I just guess I was picturing Bruce Willis singing along to it, something funny. With Quentin movies, the music sometimes lets you go.
But this fun musical sing-along is just a moment of respite before the violence starts again. Tarantino's more recent films show that his drive to feature the music he loves doesn't just stop with pop and rock. He might not want to employ film composers, but he seems to own plenty of their soundtracks. Listen to this scene from Kill Bill. The tune Daryl Hannah's whistling was written by Bernard Herrmann for the 1968 film Twisted Nerve. And remember this one? Ennio Morricone's music for the climactic shootout in A Fistful of Dollars. Tarantino, a master of utilising the pop song, uses composers all right, but only when their music is already iconic, revealing the debt even he owes to the history of the movie soundtrack. When it comes to respecting tradition, one cinema franchise more than any other requires its composers to acknowledge its musical heritage. For Casino Royale, composer David Arnold faced the challenge of rebooting the legacy of John Barry for a contemporary audience, 20 Bond movies on from Dr. No.
It was kind of classic, back to sort of Barry, back to basics, the spirit of it, the wailing brass, the seductive strings, but knowing that it's a different world.
Casino Royale would be the first Bond movie to star Daniel Craig. Arnold's score had to reflect this tougher and more physical 007.
The music was modelled on Daniel's movement, muscularity, his attitude, the way he looked.
So you're actually scoring body language at
Well,
that time?
Bond's not one for saying an awful lot. The music is accompanying him moving.
But Casino Royale is also an origin tale, explaining how Bond becomes a fully fledged super spy. This presented Arnold with an interesting opportunity to work with the classic Bond theme.
He deliberately didn't play the Bond theme during that film in its entirety or out until the very end of the picture, because it felt like he wasn't that character yet. When he wins the DB5 in the game of cards, first time you kind of hint at that ding-dong. First time he puts the dinner jacket on, you know, he gets the tuxedo and he straightens his tie and he looks at himself in the mirror and you think, okay, that's a bit closer. And then ultimately, at the end of the film, when he says the name's Bond, James Bond, you go, yep, there you are. Hello.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
It's only when these 4 seconds of black appear that we hear the Bond theme in full, just in time for the credits to roll. David Arnold's music helped give the Bond franchise a new lease of life. And in 2013, Skyfall, performed and co-written by Adele, became the first Bond song to win an Academy Award. The song carries its heritage proudly. The powerful chorus, the classic Bond chord progression it incorporates, and crucially, the careful casting of the performer, following a tradition that began with Shirley Bassey and Goldfinger.
I don't think you would necessarily expect to see Adele in a scene, but the sound of her voice says this could belong in Bond's world.
Pop may once have been a cinematic upstart, but now it's so well established it can draw on its own tradition. Today's audience enjoys films that can move seamlessly between the orchestral score and the energy of popular music, making soundtracks more diverse, forceful, and relevant. This has become the modern sound of cinema. Next time, the film score goes electronic. How technology pushed the boundaries of the soundtrack.